Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Screw Space podcast. Today, what we are discussing is boardroom blind spots, geopolitics as a corporate risk multiplier. So, what does that mean? Basically, in today's interconnected world, boardrooms can often be forgiven to assume that the company's bottom line might purely be affected by a competitor or a market crash and just essentially live in their own little bubble. But that can be quite a naive outlook. And basically, the next major impact that happens on a business can actually come from a political decision that came halfway across the globe. And boards often overlook these geopolitical risks, and that's why we are joined today by Gareth Westwood, Head of Intelligence at Sibylline, and to basically talk us through how geopolitics is a corporate risk multiplier and how to actually use it as an advantage. But yeah, before we get into it, Gareth, are you okay just to give the audience a little bit of an introduction to yourself, if that's okay?
Of course, and Nick, thank you so much for inviting me on the pod. I'm a huge fan of it, and it's a privilege to be invited on. I'm Gareth. I'm currently head of, as you said, global intelligence at Sibylline, a risk advisory, risk intelligence consulting company. I've been here for a few years now. Prior to that, I was head of intelligence for quite a large pharmaceutical company. But like many in my sphere, in our sphere, I preceded that with 10 years or so more actually in the public sector, military intelligence, as well as working with the Foreign Office. So I lived in Pakistan for 2 years, Afghanistan for 2 years, multiple tours of Iraq. And before that, I was a music teacher, but that's probably less relevant to this podcast, Nick. So, but yeah, that's what I do now, and my current gig. Um, I'm privileged to oversee a team of nearly 50 um, uh, highly capable intelligence and risk professionals, ranging from threat intelligence, uh, monitoring specialist staff, all the way through to deep regional experts, cyber experts, etc. So that's what I currently do, and I think this issue. Um, all of us in my company are passionate about. And we've seen this trend over the last few years of boards becoming more interested. And, just as a quick throat clearing, I saw this myself at my previous role in a pharmaceutical company. As soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, um, boards wanted to know about China Taiwan because they'd seen it in The Economist or the FT. So I think you're hitting this subject at exactly the right time, and it is a subject that I'm very passionate about. So I'm looking forward to getting into it in a little bit more detail today.
Absolutely. So let's crack on into it then. So I suppose my first question to you is, yeah, how can sort of political instability, shifting trade alliances, whatever it might be, how can that actually have an impact on the business and supply chains? Because it's quite two, well, I say it's two separate worlds, but it's not. Everything's interconnected these days. So talk us through how a decision can be made in a boardroom or in a government meeting that can then have that chain reaction that goes across the globe to then affect a completely separate business. Talk what goes along on that chain reaction, Gareth?
No, that's a really good question, and I'll preface this by saying, unfortunately, um, I see the rethinking of company structures and organizational structures here as key for the interconnection between what your security team are seeing, for example, and what might affect um, the legal team, the corporate governance team. I mean, when we think about geopolitics and business, there's kind of a few ways that this manifests, right? What are we offering as a business, as a company? Where can we operate? And how does the world perceive me as a company for doing it? Um, so, I mean, on supply chains, we've seen one immediate example is um, a small yet capable terrorist group in Yemen called the Houthis, and how they were overnight able to drive up shipping costs, force global rerouting around the Cape of the South Africa. Um, Companies reliant on, just in time logistics, you're thinking automotive and more, suddenly had delays stretching weeks, had catastrophic outcomes. The US-China trade war, the tensions, we can, it's not just the chip manufacturers that are affected, but other firms that are reliant on those manufacturers as well. On the supply chain front, just an anecdote, even before the Israel-Gaza conflict and the manifestations, there was a schism between Israel and Gaza prior to that, a couple of years before. I mean, there's been many. And they were, the border was shut down for a period of time between Gaza and Israel. I think it was a few days. I operated in pharmaceuticals. Immediately, our cold chain was in jeopardy, right? Because refrigeration, your battery's going to run out. So you're losing millions. Similarly, when we had the various coups in sub-Saharan Africa, and ECOWAS put the restrictions on the borders. So one couldn't get through the land borders supplies in and out. That was a very localized military coup in a part of the world that many of the big geopolitical publications, the news would not look at, would not concentrate on. But it had outsized impact on our ability to ship materials in and out of a jurisdiction. Sanctions, an even more immediate shock. I think Russia's a really good example. 2022, when Western governments imposed sanctions, overnight, dozens of firms had to abandon operations. One particular energy company, again, lost about 25 billion from their bottom line overnight. Companies had to write off assets, reconfigure supply chains, and that isn't a slow trend. That's the market closing instantly. And finally, before I wrap this up, reputation.
Yep.
We're already seeing. I mean, my company has clients who are directly impacted by sentiment vis-a-vis Israel or whatever the case may be, that we are actively monitoring for at the moment. Because not only does it affect the physical security of executives, but a boycott, an activist campaign online can, again, within 24 hours, affect companies' share price, be that social media campaigns, shareholder activism. We've even seen, fashion brands in China, being boycotted because of their use of cotton from the Xinjiang province, tech companies in Russia. And I think if you're reacting to this as right of ban, as we'd say in the military, you're too late. Even a day before, you're too late. And there are triggers, warnings, and indicators. In the Russia piece, for example, my company was warning folks for months before that this would be, this outcome would occur. I know Western intelligence was warning folks a year in advance. But if you looked at the prevailing sentiment online in the mainstream news media, you'd not really have an idea that the Ukraine piece was going to really hit the fan, probably until a few weeks before, even then. So those companies that were bequeathed with good geopolitical risk intelligence functions were best placed. But then, Nick, it's not just having the function in the first place, whether you have a vendor or a team or all of the above. It's about the whole company having an appreciation for the risk and actually integrating that team into the rest of the company. And this is where, Nick, the challenge lays. Because normally this stuff is in the security department. And I've seen, the security department can be in legal, sometimes it's in facility, sometimes it's in HR, and ergo, first of all, it's a cost center. Okay. So resources are also being cut. But second of all, um, I know for a fact that these functions, depending on the company, have a real hard time getting traction with the rest of the company. Um, it took me a long time at a previous company to get some other parts of the business operations on board because you're seen as creating work for them.
Yep.
So that's what my initial piece about organizational structure, you know, it's one thing to realize that an escalation between Iran and Israel or the US can result in, mass supply chain unrest in the Red Sea. There's one thing having a team or a vendor that can help you understand that, but then having a company structure which allows you to permeate that throughout the whole company. And that's, I think, the subject of the podcast, right? Because a lot of this is held with the CSO and not necessarily the board or the C-suite. And the geopolitical risk factor, I mean, one of the big four consulting firms now sees geopolitical risk as one of the top risks on the risk register, right? Um, and I think there's a growing appreciation of that. But as I said, these functions are often head with CSOs, even sometimes, director levels, um, that don't get the visibility of the C-suite. So there's two things there. There's the ability to foresee these shocks, and then there's the structure with which to permeate this amongst all of the business units that require it, from corporate comms to legal and governance, HR, security. So, yeah, that's my kind of opening gambit, Nick. I'm not sure
Mm.
if you agree.
No, no, absolutely, and I agree with it all. And essentially, it raises the million-dollar question of how does an organization defend themselves on a decision of this magnitude when it surely just can't be put into the business strategy for the next 12 months, like, or what if X decision happens? Because when you've got leaders like Donald Trump who are so erratic and you don't know what decision he's going to come out with day to day, how do you foresee stuff like that? You can only foresee so much. So, yes, how does an organization prepare as best as they can for the unpredictable and the inevitable?
So you're never going to get it 100% right.
Mm.
Um, and we've seen intelligence failures over, decades. 9/11, the Falklands War, you know, arguably COVID, weapons of mass destruction, October the 7th, Ukraine. Um, what a geopolitical team can't do is be um, a source of certainty. But what it can do is employ, I think, recognized and well understood methodologies of forecasting and scenario planning. So I think, um, how do we integrate this? Well, you do need a function that can systematically monitor the environment using known methods like, I know, environmental scanning, stemples, petzels, all the rest of it. And for that, you do need professionals, either vendors or an in-house team, or combination of both. You then need, I think, a systematic approach to scenario planning. So I think it's about identifying a company, and they'll have this. They'll have the risk register, identifying their greatest assets. The importance of their assets, and then the team identifying what scenarios could affect the assets. So it's knowing about your assets and what I said right at the beginning. What are we doing? What are we selling? What are we doing? Where are we doing it? And therefore, what current geopolitical scenarios have the potential to affect those first two things, and then stress test them.
Mm.
So China Taiwan is an easy one, right? So at our company we do strategic risk forecasts, which are basically scenario pieces, which we don't just look at most likely, most dangerous. We do that for most things, but we actually try to get a bit deeper. We do 5, 6 scenarios, likelihoods, and then track the implications of each scenario.
Okay.
And I think that is both that's both an academic exercise, but it's also tabletop, right? So I think geopolitical risk teams, it's not enough to write the reports. I think they need to be intimately involved with getting the board together and red teaming, having that tabletop approach. So you've identified what you're doing, where you're doing it. Your geopolitical risk team has worked with stakeholders around the company to understand, okay, what's hitting the fan, frankly, around the world at the minute that has the potential to really affect us, whether that's ransomware, whether that's North Korean kind of cyber operations in the crypto space, whether that's China, Taiwan, or what's happening in the DRC. You might be an extractives company, for example. Um, and then table topping, right? Okay, this is what's happening at the moment. This is the most likely. This is the most dangerous. Um, this is the most dangerous. And what are the scenarios in between? And what happens with each scenario? So it's about, I mean, to wrap this up, shooting from the hip, Nick, understanding the company. And this, I think, is where, there is a use case for intelligence professionals. And we don't have to use the word intelligence. It freaks some people out. Um, we can use analysts, risk professionals, where there's definitely a place for them in-house and the vendor. Because essentially, if you're in-house, even if you're a contractor or an embedded member of staff, you become the expert in your company.
Mm,
But you're an intelligence professional, so you're able to, intake the feeds that you get and understand the company so well to understand what are the global pinch points, what are the trends that could have a short, medium, or long-term effect on my company's assets and operations. And that's why you need somebody at that kind of fulcrum, I think,
mm,
between the streams of global intelligence that's coming in from whatever vendors that you have and open sources and media
mm,
and maybe human sources. And then that understanding go, okay, this obscure conflict in sub-Saharan Africa is really going to screw around with the new oil facility that we're building there.
mm,
This change of government means that we're going to have to pay off the other tribes now in order to build our pipeline.
mm.
Yeah. Um, and that's scenario planning. I remember I was at the British Embassy in Kabul, and we had a certain company come to my office and basically asked for the political and security landscape around Western Afghanistan in order to build a pipeline. There aren't functions in companies that can get to grips with that easily. It's not something that can be done without that geopolitical um, framework. So the third thing is integration, right? Um, and this goes to the previous question. These insights that your geopolitical team are developing can't sit in a silo. They can't sit on a shelf. They need to be integrated into enterprise risk management, capital allocation, strategy decisions, even market entry decisions. And this is where the great opportunity is with understanding the geopolitical landscape, because it's not all about challenges. It's not all about, you know, holy smokes, what if China invades Taiwan? Or what are the challenges? It's all also about, okay, this change of government has occurred in whatever Latin American jurisdiction or European jurisdiction. What advantages does that give my company?
Mm,
What's their policy positions? And how can I take most advantage of this relatively obscure electoral decision in the country in which I operate in order to, advance my business operations or environment. So that's kind of another thing I want to highlight. It's not always about challenge; it's about
mm.
opportunity as well. And at my company, our analysts are encouraged to objectively see, the risks and benefits of geopolitical inflection points.
Yeah, that's a terrific point, and one where I wanted to sort of go down a little bit further. And let's just hypothetically say that I'm a CEO of an organization, and there is going to be political changes across the globe in the next 6 months, for example, some of which can positively affect our company, and some of which can negatively affect it. Now, I am sat in the war room, I'm sat in the crisis meeting, I'm prepping my company ahead of this. And I need to know to like how to set up my spider's web in the sense of like, 'cause it can't all be internal. That's the reason why this whole podcast came about is the fact that boardrooms can be too much in their own little bubble. And when we're talking about geopolitics, you can't do that. It's bigger than yourself. So, what sort of systems have I set up? Because you can't have it all internal, like you've mentioned a few minutes ago, Gareth, is a sense of like, yes, you can have your internal security team, you can have internal intelligence analysts, and then you can also have a vendor as well. But is it also bigger than that in the sense of like, yes, these people are all security minded, but we're talking about again something existential here, and we're talking about the business. And I'm not saying that security people don't understand business. Absolutely, that's not what I'm saying. But there is people that understand business better, and therefore, do we need to start bringing in legal counterparts, or like how big does this spider's web go in terms of spotting political movements, and then how that will affect said business? How do we set up this super team? What would be the ideal, super squad that will tackle this, Gareth? What do you think?
It's a really interesting question. I think there's a few things here to parse out. First of all, um, whatever we call this person, this function, needs to be in the C-suite.
Mm,
Um, Now, I know there was a trend a few years ago actually to have a CISO and the CSO essentially become the same person
mm,
and have this overarching. But again, that's kind of security minded, right? Because then you have the chief risk officer. Um, so there needs to be an approach, and there is a wonderful chap in my company called Gareth Westwood, and he set up the geopolitical risk team function in a major bank, and maybe it's probably worth reaching out to him as well because he'll have very strong opinions on this. But in a nutshell, I agree.
mm,
The geopolitical risk function, um, it's an uncanny valley because many of those who go into this have come from the kind of security intelligence sector. And that's the challenge that we face, I think. And that's as much about a bottom-up approach as the top-down approach. It's retraining our analysts um, to think wider,
mm,
think about macroeconomics, think about, global supply chains and market entry and currency fluctuations. And, if this electoral event happens in this country, what happens to the price of copper, for example? And I think there's a bit of a dilemma here, Nick, because traditionally it's chicken and egg. Because traditionally it's security teams that have wanted this function. So as a result, you get people, whether you're a vendor or whatever, get people in, and even if they're grads, they become security minded because it's the CSO of client X that they want to know about executive protection and potential, protest choke points and all that kind of stuff. So the I think that the germ of the private sector intelligence industry, if you will, has come from the security sector,
mhm,
and it's only recently that wider geopolitical risk has played into it. I think it's always been there. You've always had, for example, your analysts in trading companies looking at this, but again, it's back to that first point. It's siloed. We have so many folks looking at the same stuff for different reasons. Um, so you have your, folks looking at it for on the trading floor, for example, to look at investment opportunities. You have folks looking at it in corporate comms. It's the same thing, actually. You're looking at what's our reputational exposure as a result of this most recent thing that's happened. You have then maybe small intelligence team within the security department. You then have the cyber team. If you're lucky, they're looking at the geopolitical piece and trying to um, get ahead of the information security consequences. Often not. Often they're just looking at their networks,
Yeah.
and they think geopolitics is for somebody else. So that's not really an answer. I think breaking down the silos is the only answer. You have so many folks looking at the same thing, um, for different reasons. And I mean, it's just like in an embassy. You have so many individuals looking at the same sources for completely different reasons. You might have the political officers, the military attachés, um, the spooks, the security staff, the aid staff, looking at all the same stuff for different reasons. They're lucky that they share a building and they can have a meeting every week, which they do. Um, in a company, I think that's the challenge. And maybe unifying some of these departments under a function and putting that in the C-suite, um, is the answer. Nick, it's all there. I work with hundreds of companies. It's all there. Um, but I think there's a sense of protectionism in some companies that doesn't allow easily for these different silos to be broken down, and unified,
Hmm.
in a way, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if that's your experience as well, Nick.
No, absolutely. I don't think there ever will be a one size fits all. And this actually segues perfectly to the last question in the sense of um I think we are now at the end of the debate in terms of like, oh, we need to get security into the boardroom. We need to start discussing it in terms of security terminology. I think we're there now. I think security is well entranced in the boardroom now. Um, whether that be regulations actually having to enforce companies to take security more seriously, whether that's the explosion of AI, which has then put the fear of God into boardrooms and therefore they're now taking security seriously, whatever it might be, 2 + 2 and 3 + 1, they both equal 4, and we both come to the same outcome, in the sense of I think security is there. Why do I bring that up? Well, because essentially with security being in the boardroom now, it's the next step of like, cool, okay, like how serious do we take this now? Because as you mentioned earlier on, it is a cost center. And let's not, oh, people always say like, oh, it is a cost center. Yes, it is a cost center, but look at the latest high profile breaches. It can cost you a company tenfold. So it's all about how much risk and how much fire you want to play with in terms of like, cool, well, it's just like an insurance on your company.
Yeah.
If you want to drive your car around uninsured, look at the amount of prats that are on the road at the moment. And like it's just a case of like your business is just like that. And every business is digital, so you're only playing with fire if you're not taking security
And
seriously.
and Nick, if I can jump in there, that's a
Push can.
really good point. I think this is why traditionally, information security and technology budgets, cyber budgets, in companies have, and I don't want to misspeak here, been traditionally a lot larger than the physical security budget, because it was very because you're right, there's no ROI. If we do our job properly, nothing happens. Uh, you know, and depending on your CEO, depending on your board, that's quite hard to reconcile.
Mm,
Um, in the case of cyber, there are countless examples of where a company has been breached, attacked, subject of ransomware. And now with legislation, um, in which you have to declare that, it's quite easy to see how a cyber attack, a successful one, can immediately affect your share price overnight. And let's face it, that's what boards care about. Um, Traditionally, we've not had a 9/11 every day, which is great. So the kind of anecdotal approach to case study analysis and proving the negative, look what you could have won or lost, as it were, to kind of phrase, hasn't been it. But we've had 9/11, then we had the global financial crisis. And then we've had, the war on terrorism, ISIS. We've had Ukraine. We've had uh, October 7th. We've had COVID, um, of course. Uh, we've had the US-China trade war. We've had the Arab Spring. and the energy instability associated with that. So these geopolitical inflection points, shocks, have, unfortunately for the world, but conveniently for those who wish to advocate for this function, concertinaed. And now boards are now thinking more of the what next. And that gives folks at our profession a great opportunity here to show companies, whether they be our companies or clients, how valuable a holistic approach to intelligence, security, and risk analysis really is. It gives us a great opportunity. And I think, going back to your last point, the risks here are that we don't engage. At one company I used to be at, we was in the kind of intelligence risk analysis up, and the cyber folks were it's basically a SOC. There was a head of CTI, cyber threat intelligence, but it was basically a SOC. And I tried to, we had a couple of vendors at the time, try to convey the value of strategic geopolitical intelligence to the cyber function. And it was dismissed out of hand. And I think that is still a barrier to be broken down. There's still so many companies out there that have a cyber team, cyber SOC, that is still tactical. Cyber threat intelligence is looking at IOCs and reverse engineering malware. It's not looking at, okay, China's peeved off this country, or this country's peeved off China. China has these APTs. What are they likely to do, and how are they likely to do it, and who are they going to do it to? Right, SOC. This is what may happen in a month because this election has taken place. And that's still missing, I think, at least I see it in so many companies. That's still a silo that needs breaking down. I'm not sure if you've seen that as well, Nick.
No, absolutely. I've agreed with everything that you've sort of said on this podcast, and to be honest with you, in true to form with the subject, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and with the magnitude of what we discussed, and I have to do bring us to an end as we have come to our time. So this is probably one that we definitely need to have a part two on because, like I say, with the magnitude of the topic that we're talking about, how geopolitics affects the boardroom, it's hard to compress into 30 minutes, isn't it, Gareth? So for anybody who may have any questions for what Gareth has raised today or would like to learn more about what Sibylline do and their services, I'll be sure to put their information down below. But Gareth, once again, thank you very much for coming on the Scoop Space podcast.
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please do reach out to me on LinkedIn, any of your viewers, and I look forward to a part two where we can delve even deeper, and maybe even a part three. Who knows?
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Gareth.
Thank you.